We grew up in very agricultural communities. We see how agriculture can benefit and detriment a community, whether that's the practices that are being done, the labor that's being brought in or sourced locally from the community that it's there. And being able to kind of go back into a space, for me especially, back into a space that is so deeply like human, food, and having enough food and having the right food and what even is the right food, that's a whole fun can of worms to start taking apart. But I mean, being able to have an impact that both can be very individual and very like on a personal level with the person enjoying the chocolate bar, but also behind that sits this huge chain of benefit that can reach out into these huge number of different places in the world is I think the thing that just really...
I Am Consciously Curious, a podcast for those that are searching for meaning and fulfillment in their lives. My name is Victor Chan, and I'm on a mission to find out why people do what they do. I've interviewed white-collar to blue-collar, entrepreneurs to passion projects, and life is just too short to not produce meaningful work. Thanks for tuning in. We're live.
Awesome.
What day is it? It's Friday.
Yeah.
Ben and Bob Schultz, welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How are you guys doing?
Good. It's been a really fun start to the year.
Yeah.
So,
and January's almost over.
I know.
It's hard to believe.
You guys were at the Startup Grind yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How did that go?
It was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
I got to see, I think it was like probably another 10 or 12 companies that were there.
Okay.
All doing really cool things in the CPG space, whether it's beverages or kind of new formats for things.
Yeah.
I saw somebody who did like alcohol gummies.
Yeah.
Which was very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also pairing that with a lot of NA and like mix in your own type things that were really interesting. I feel like that category is just going wild.
Who was there?
Right now.
Amy Kessler was there. I saw a picture
Amy
from
Kessler
Amy.
was there.
Yeah.
Yep. Amy was there with Carolyn's Crisps.
Yes.
So that was very cool. We got a second to chat as well. So.
And I didn't know, is the host of Startup Grind, is it Rajiv?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. Rajiv and
Rajiv,
Sid.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, wow. The guy that raps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We briefly had a conversation on LinkedIn, but I've never had the pleasure of meeting him.
Yeah, he should
Oh,
be.
yeah.
He's a really nice guy.
Really, really
Amazing.
fun dude.
Really good at bringing people together, too.
Yeah, totally.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So on today's discussion is about chocolate alternatives, and it's a little overwhelming as to what angle we should tackle this, because there's so many reasons why we should explore mesquite and chocolate alternatives, like what chocolate or cacao has done is doing, and as far as manufacturing, and even like how nutritious it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it start for you guys? And I know that you guys love chocolate,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where would you like to start? Would you like to start at a time before chocolate? I know you had separate lives before, and then how amazing it is to start something with each other. And you've shared how easy is it to work with someone that you have this deep trust with already, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you take the reins. Like, where would you guys like to start?
Well, I think Mez Foods really did start in our childhood. Like we grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. Our father and mother actually collaborated on businesses together, and still do in kind of different ways to this day.
Okay.
So we got a very up close and personal look at what owning your own business, and in their case, it was a couple of pizza restaurants in Southwest Michigan.
Okay.
And not only see them be involved in it, but also from an early age for ourselves, also be very involved in it.
Sure.
We were, whether that was joining them as they were kind of setting things up and getting things off the ground, or we also did quite a bit of work there, starting kind of in middle school all the way through the end of college for me, at least.
In every role, cooking, front of house, just meeting people,
delivery.
Delivery.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like literally every role you could possibly have.
Making dough, getting there early.
At that time, was this kind of the future? Like, or did you see yourself entering the pizza industry or not really?
Not really.
No, I don't think either of
Okay.
us felt a big call towards that. And in fact, our parents actually ended up selling those restaurants later and kind of exited that industry generally. But I think it kind of affected both of us in really interestingly different ways. For me, I think I really felt that bug of being involved in something that was really kind of incumbent upon me in order for it to be successful or for it to be a failure. Just having a big role in something that felt really meaningful to me. But it kind of steered me away from food. I think working in restaurants at a young age was very fun and very rewarding, but I think it also just made me realize I didn't want to keep working in restaurants after that. But I think Bob kind of took something a little bit different away.
Yeah, I did. But I also, I really enjoyed working in the restaurants, and I felt like you get this sense of duty. You get to like have this camaraderie with people.
Yeah.
But I really was planning to go to med school. Like I studied chem. I was going to go into medicine, was kind of like the track that I was going down. And then once I graduated undergrad and took like a gap year, I saw all my friends really not enjoying med school. And I was like, I don't know if that's really what I want to do. I think there's probably a different way to use a chemistry background.
Sure.
Was just cooking a ton. And I was like, oh, well, that was when Impossible was getting like a lot bigger, like 2014, 2015. Like David Chang was really being involved with Impossible. And I was like, oh, there's people that are doing like PhD chemistry, PhD like biological work in food science. And I was like, oh, maybe this is a space that I could go into. I enjoy food. And just kind of that really kind of drove me ultimately to get into food.
Yeah.
Wow. Were you guys still in Michigan at this time?
Yeah, at that point I was still in Michigan. Ben was in New York at that point.
Oh wow.
Yeah. There's about 5 years difference between us. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess side tangent. Are your friends are physicians now?
Yeah. A lot of them are.
Do they like their life?
I mean, when I can talk to them, they seem like they're enjoying it. I mean, I think that it's so rewarding to be into medicine. And I think that there are things that are like tangible about going in and doing that work every single day.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take away from the fact that like, that's a awesome career choice. But for me, it was like, I mean, I don't have any problems working 50, 60, 70 hour weeks, but I do kind of want it to be towards something that I can build. Kind of going back to what Ben was saying with the pizza store thing, is like, I want it to be incumbent on me to make this thing successful. And like in medicine, it feels like a little bit more, there's a lot more, not roadblocks, but there's a lot more conditions that you need to set to make sure
you can
that's
make it on your own. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And I'm guessing you would attribute that to the pizza shop, your parents.
Yeah.
Right. Most people don't realize or have that awareness until later in their life. This personal branding awareness, this working for yourself awareness until later on. Most people cultivate a certain set of skills in maybe the corporate or tech world, and then they're like, let me go off on my own type thing.
Yeah.
And so whoever wants to start, you're still on your individual journeys. Where are we at?
Yeah. I mean, so when I was still in Kalamazoo, so we're from like the Kalamazoo, Michigan area. Was cooking a lot in just my like apartment. But at that point, like, I mean, Ben was actually a pretty big influence on me wanting to start doing something on my own. Ben's always been kind of like bridges his own path. And I was like, well, I'm going to go to Italy and go into a culinary arts program. And my parents were not like, are you sure? Like we just got out of pizza, man. Like, are you sure you really want to do that? Yeah. But I think that, I mean, I got a lot of trust. People are like, okay, you know, you've shown that you are willing to work. Like in undergrad, you've been willing to do anything within your academics. Like, this probably isn't a bad idea, but maybe, are you really sure you want to do that? So that was its own, like, the program in Italy fell apart.
How far did you get into it?
I had already quit my job. I'd moved to Spain for a little bit. I ended up staging in Scotland for a little bit too, in Edinburgh, which was different. I illegally immigrated into the UK for a little bit. That was a bad decision, but that was really fun. But I also realized like that stage experience also like showed me like being a line cook is just as difficult, or just as many hours as being a physician, but you get paid a lot worse. And like, I was like, maybe I made a different kind of mistake.
I can appreciate this. I mean, you did a lot of soul searching, a lot of learning about yourself.
Yeah.
You probably gained a deep appreciation for food.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
Like the chef I met yesterday or 2 days ago, cooking in someone's home, the guest gets to see all the effort that goes into.
That's true.
It's not just a plate that arrives on your table. And so now when you get a behind the scenes look and you're participating in the actual process of cooking with a team, and, you know, all for one type thing and one for all, it felt good, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, it was great. I mean, for me too, it was really interesting because I didn't really have a ton of background on like British food and Scottish food more particularly.
Okay.
The guy that I was working with, Ben Reed, was super focused on like, hey, everybody thinks that Scottish food is like iron brew, like deep fried Snickers bar or Mars bars. I don't want to offend anybody in Scotland. Deep fried Mars bars. But he's like, we have a bunch of really great food and we're just exporting it to France, exporting it to like London. I guess exporting it. I don't know if that's even true if you're still in the British Isles, but he's like, I want to take what's great about Scotland and put it on a plate and also showcase like a lot of different chefs. So like in the month that I was there, I met chefs from Australia, from the south of France. It was this woman that was doing her own foie gras. She was like a 6th generation foie gras maker, which was, I'm growing up in Michigan, didn't really eat that much foie.
No?
Yeah.
So it was cool to see the different terroirs of the foie. And then I got this really random experience to have to like serve one of the top chefs that just happened to be in Scotland at the time, Sean Roca, which was really fun. So I got all these really crazy experiences that I was like, this is something that I want to do. I just don't know if I want to do this specific aspect of food ultimately.
Talk about expanding your palate.
Yeah.
The first time you have anything, but specifically foie, everything tastes the same.
Yeah.
And so when you say there's different levels of foie, it's like how long did it take, or how many iterations of tasting did it take for you to gain an appreciation for something as subtle as foie?
I mean, I liked it right away. So she was only there for a week, so I got to try like different, like it depends on like how you can it, where you can it, how much fat is then added within that, where that fat's coming from. So there's a lot of nuances that I was like, I just thought this was liver and nothing's, it just stopped there. I've had liver. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not very good.
Yes.
But foie has a very big dynamic range. And
it reminds me of sushi, caviar, uni, and if you don't have this, I feel like it's wasted if you go straight to the top.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you don't even have the vernacular, the verbiage to describe what you're experiencing.
No, not at all. I think I still like to this day, I think that that's still like my top foie experience. So I'm like, I haven't really gone in.
Have you been to Gavroche?
No.
Okay,
no.
So a good friend just opened a French restaurant near Professor Pizza, Old Town, Second City area. It's called Gavroche, French for mischievous child. Jason Chan and then Chef Mitchell. But the waiter waiting on us said that he has tried a lot of foie, and the one that they have is actually pretty good. So if you're in that area,
I'll have to check it out.
Check that out.
Ben, where would you start as far as cultivating an appreciation for your palate or food?
Yeah, I think for me, it was when I studied abroad in Asia. I went to China and I lived there for like 6 months in Beijing primarily. And then afterwards, I got out of school kind of right into the Great Recession. And I was looking at continuing to work at the restaurant, or alternatively, there was a better opportunities teaching English in China at that time from like a an income perspective. So I actually moved back there for a little bit more than a year and a half. And that was really fascinating for me because it was kind of the first time I was thrown into something where it was just a ton of different flavors, many of them that I wasn't necessarily as used to as I had assumed that I was before I went there.
Are we talking chicken feet? What are we talking about?
I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, just the different spicy Sichuan food that you would have. Beijing has such an amazing kind of cosmopolitan, especially within China, food culture, where you get a lot of the stuff from the Northwest. So you have lamb and very kind of like Muslim sort of flavors that are really, really delicious. You get the Southern food, obviously Sichuan food's really popular throughout the world, but especially in China, you have hot pot, Beijing specific hot pot. And unfortunately, the first time that I lived there, I probably went to McDonald's like once every other day because I just was so like overwhelmed with what was going on and kind of needing a little bit of like a reach back to something that was not that I eat a lot of McDonald's or did at that time. But it was something that just felt like a little bit closer, a little bit more comfortable. But I think that was where one of the things I really appreciate about Chinese cooking is that you really see the animal like on the plate. I feel like in a lot of Western cooking, like we do all of these things to try to make it look like nothing like what it came from. So fish is always filleted and deboned, and there's never anything else kind of on the plate.
Yeah.
But I feel like when I really started like noticing a lot more about how what I was eating was connected back to the place that it was originally coming from, and kind of the respect that you need to have for that chicken or that fish.
Was that something that someone told you? Was the intention?
No, that was just something that happened to me actually for myself in a way that like I don't think I ever really experienced when I would eat
this
pizza or chicken nuggets.
Similar like Mediterranean too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. Like it just really presented something much closer to it, and I think for me, like it made me realize, there's a lot more going on with the food that you get. I mean, one thing that was very common at the time would be actually like picking out a live fish from a restaurant, and then sometimes it would be killed in front of you. And and you're like, okay, so I mean, this is what something just died so that I may live. And there's something
100%.
there that I think, at least growing up as a child in the Midwest in the 90s, in Caucasian culture, you just really didn't necessarily see a lot of that close connection. I felt like there was a lot of wrappers and a lot of branding and a lot of like food science not necessarily food science, but things that were separating us from what we were actually eating, despite the fact that where we grew up, I mean, there was cornfields in our backyard. Sure. Like we were very much in the middle of like kind of the classic farmland of that area, which I think is just something sort of unique and interesting at least in my experience, unique about America, where a lot of other countries, there's some more deeper relationship to where the food come from in some way, or respect for it, or
100%.
Knowledge of it. I think you see that with like DOC in Europe of like, no, this is really just from this area by these standards. Like you can really trust it. And I feel like growing up in what I sort of feel like was sort of the nadir of food culture in America, the early to mid 90s. And I think we're actually coming into a much better space right now. I think I've come to see how little I understood about what it was I was even eating in a lot of ways. And so I think my real formative kind of time of getting to really appreciate the depth and the breadth of different cuisines was when I was living abroad. And then after that, I moved to New York for over a decade and, kind of just stayed very much in the middle of all of the cuisine. My wife is super into food, much like Bob in a lot of ways. So they're a lot of fun to be around because I don't really have to think about food. I just kind of go where they go.
Takes a lot of effort. Right? Yeah. What do we have for dinner? Takes a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I unfortunately outsource most of that effort. So that was just a continuation of a lot of different food cultures and a lot of different cuisine like levels of, very, very high cuisine all the way down to just, there's a very vibrant food truck culture there as well. So I think that's really kind of where food became a much bigger part of my life, was like as an adult, actually.
I wonder if you ever had this thought of like, could I homestead? Could I slaughter an animal?
I've definitely had that thought, like just from the perspective of like seeing butchering.
Yeah.
On the one hand, feels very grotesque and very intense, but I think on the other hand, how is that any less bad than just eating what comes out of a butchery? And I do think that there's something about understanding more about what the process is that has always, I think, been something that probably Bob and I actually really share. So whereas Bob went kind of more into food and food science, coming out of a scientific background, I went right into kind of manufacturing and electronics. And so I spent my early career kind of post-China doing supply chain management and all sorts of different stuff in Asia in manufacturing for small electronic companies. I spent some time at Peloton after that, where we were doing a lot of work, not just and how we were manufacturing it, but I was also doing product development, which was super
What year was that?
exciting. 2017.
Wow,
until
pre-pandemic. It popped off in the pandemic.
Yeah, I left in 2023, so I got to see both the meteoric rise and the meteoric stumble too at the same time.
Oh wow!
We actually, it was one of the fun experiences that we shared when we were both in New York. Is that I don't know why we were both working from home, because it was pre-2020, but we got to watch the IPO for Peloton together. I was just like, I'm just going to go in late to work.
Yeah.
And Ben's like, I'm working from home anyway. So surprisingly, nobody's really doing much on the IPO day.
Yeah. It wasn't
just getting ready to party.
Weren't a lot of meetings. Yeah.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very, very cool. It was a very, just fortunate experience in my life that I'm very, very grateful for. But I think being at small companies during that time period definitely continued to reinforce a lot of that. I want to do this. I would like to be forming my own company with my own set of goals, with things like that. And I do think in a way, like I did sort of look at it from the perspective of, I know that's my end goal, but how do I kind of position myself in my 20s and early 30s to be best capable of doing that goal? And so I did spend time
so smart.
Yeah, in other people's companies, kind of like at very early stages and very middle stages, kind of learning a lot of what they were doing. I also feel like at the other end of it, if you're interested in doing it, there's no amount of experience that necessarily is going to make it easy. Mm-hmm. It may make it slightly easier or parts of it easier, but I think somebody kind of summed up being a parent and starting a business really, really well, which is that there really is like a value to the ignorance you have of how much work and how hard it's actually going to be.
I like that. That's a wiser way of saying delusional confidence.
Yeah. There's a little bit of truth to like, if you really knew what you were putting yourself through voluntarily.
Would you do it? Would you still do it?
Probably wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Well, in this case, it's for you though, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if it was for you, for most people, for most entrepreneurs, like that's the reason why it's like you put up with all this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also think one of the things that really, and as we kind of start talking about Mez and what drove us to do this specific business, I think there's also when I can externalize what this is for and when I can make this about other people and something much bigger than just us too, that's where I found like some of the most drive and the most fulfillment in it. And I think that's actually one of the things that was super exciting about coming back from this trip to South America, to see and meet our farmers and our processors down there. We had sort of understood that the product that we use for our chocolate alternative, mesquite pods or mesquite tree pods, were very sustainable. They come from a desert climate tree, which needs very little water. They're actually nitrogen fixing plants as well, which means that they're able to regenerate the soil and plant, and kind of almost like fertilize it and make it more available for other plants to grow in it. But I think, whenever we hear stories about sustainability with food and with crops, like I think I always sort of bring a little bit of a grain of salt to it initially, where there's so much greenwashing going on, especially in food, but in so many other places where you kind of sort of wonder what...
like people are saying it just to say it? Is that what's greenwashing? Is that greenwashing?
Greenwashing is more or less like highlighting one part of what's sustainable about something, but ignoring maybe all of the other problems that it causes.
It's like not using fertilizer, for example, but it's using a ton of water, or it's using a ton of gas. In cocoa, like 70 to 80% of it's grown in West Africa. That still has to transport all the way to Europe or North America. None of it's like actually converted into a final product in Africa. And you're like, okay, well, maybe there's some more sustainable groves. There's definitely more sustainable practices within the cocoa world. Absolutely. But the majority of the commodity, like cocoa, is not like got this very strong sustainability standpoint around it.
Yeah.
But I think that even deeper to that is this: it was just important for us to be in a position where we were starting a company that was about a very real idea that had actual impact and was able to meet a really, really awesome kind of goal if we were able to take it there. And not to, kind of point at any one industry or any one place, it was just really important to us that the impact could be very genuinely real and very important for those that would be involved in it. And so what we basically were able to see is that mesquite trees, through their ability to do nitrogen fixing and through their way that they're able to take in very low water environments and very high salt environments and things like that, are actually able to take land that was covered with thin layers of salt. You couldn't grow vegetables, just scrubby brushes here and there were able to grow in it. And within 6 years, like transform it into a place where grass, other bushes, animals, bugs, it's just like a very lush growth place from kind of previously barren land. And in other cases, taking things that were like 6 times too salty, or land that was 6 times too salty to grow vegetables.
Made it habitable.
Basically making it something that then can also grow other crops on it as well. And so we feel really like the impact of actually making a market for the fruit of this tree, so that we're able to, incentivize more growth and more plantings of these trees, actually, have a really huge benefit possibility for the world. They're also nitrogen fixing plants, as I said before, which means that they also fix a ton of carbon into the soil, significantly more than many other plants do. And so we look at this as, something where it can also help offset the carbon that's coming from a lot of other industries, in addition to just the food industry, or our own carbon that we're generating by kind of moving it around, as Bob mentioned. And so we see this really, really amazing opportunity to actually have something that grows and creates a benefit for the planet, in addition to a benefit for the people that get to consume it and encounter it along the way, as well as like a finished product, as a chocolate bar.
That's wild.
Yeah.
This is all wild.
It's crazy.
Okay. So while you were cultivating your skills in supply chain and marketing, and were you brainstorming other side projects besides alternative chocolate?
I think the way that this came up actually in our lives was very serendipitous. I think the way that Bob and I often look at things is we sort of know like certain attributes of a future that we want.
Okay.
And kind of how all of those fit together sometimes can stay open and like ready for the moment to strike, if you will.
Yeah.
We got involved in this company because Bob sort of by accident, or maybe I wouldn't say by accident, but through good fortune, ordered some mesquite flour for a different project that he was working on.
Yeah, that was kind of a side project for me.
Okay.
I was kind of, while working with the different companies, I've just worked with a bunch of interesting people that want to start their own companies, or want there's a lot of folks that want to start a food company that might not know how to actually make the product, but they have like an idea of why they want to make a product. So I'd have some friends be like, I'm a marketer, but I want to market a gluten-free biscuit.
Because you're a scientist, you're a food scientist.
I'm a food scientist.
Okay.
So, and I've done like a lot of product development and scale up. So I'm like, okay. I know how to go from, and in my time in the kitchen, and then my time in my master's was all focused on like, how do you take something out of the bench, off the either the kitchen bench or the science bench, and put it onto a production line. Because the people that work in the kitchen don't always talk to the people that are on the food manufacturing line.
Okay.
And vice versa. But anyway, to go back to, I was working on this side project. Somebody wanted to do a gluten-free biscuit, and I was like, well, we could do rice, we could do tapioca, we could do all these things that are gluten-free, but why don't we try to do something else? So bought mesquite, was very sweet.
So how did you find mesquite?
I scan on Amazon, and I scan on like UL Prospector, and I scan on all these there's a lot of really good ways to find like ingredients that you wouldn't otherwise.
Like, did you have a superfood phase?
Not really. I mean, a bit.
Like Barukas?
No.
Cascara?
No, I drank Cascara, but yeah. Still got some in my pantry. But
you were looking for gluten-free flours.
I was looking for gluten-free,
basically
and that's how it was marketed.
How it was marketed.
Okay.
Yeah,
and in a lot of ways, the little marketing that mesquite flour has had in the United States has been as a gluten-free flour. Mm-hmm. But it's super flavorful. Like it has a very deep chocolate, cinnamon, honey. Depending on the varietal and the terroir, it can kind of go into a lot of different locations. Mm-hmm. in directions, but and it's also super sweet, so you can't really sub it one for one with the wheat flour because you'd sort of end up with a cookie.
Okay.
Cookie.
Doesn't always work super well. Just like
did the biscuit happen?
No, the biscuit fell flat. They're like, I think there's Simple Mills is killing it. Like, why are we going to try to revamp the Simple Mills of the world?
Okay.
Yeah, and mesquite definitely wasn't going to work for it either. So kind of like, I think you sort of set it on the shelf for a second, but it was a really interesting kind of just seed of like, man, this is
I mean, looking
delicious.
back, it's so natural that it is what it is today.
Yeah.
But then it's like with how compelling why we should be consuming mesquite over chocolate, why is the rest of the world, I don't know if they are, but why is the rest of the world sleeping on this?
I mean,
as far as we're aware, nobody else is using it to make chocolate right now. There are uses throughout the world, and it really does grow globally, pretty much everywhere except for Europe, anywhere that is very dry and very hot. And so, like in South Africa, they use it to make like a decaf coffee. If you roast the pods, they can be really delicious that way.
Wow.
In South America, it's often turned into like a syrup or like almost like a honey.
You say decaf because there's no caffeine.
There's no caffeine at all.
And no other chocolate bar states what the protein and fiber count is.
No.
This is interesting. There's a nutritional aspect to this.
Well, that was kind of when we first started it too. Like nobody was really curious as to like, why are you making a new chocolate? Like, why are you making an alternative to like cocoa's omnipresent? Like, there's not a shortage. And then last year happened, and there was huge price spikes in the cocoa market. It just got a lot more expensive, and there's been a lot more people that are like, oh, maybe we do need an alternative cocoa. But the nutrition aspect of it was like Ben and I, when we were initially like formulating things, we're like, nobody knows why you want an alternative cocoa. So we had to kind of like give consumers an idea of like, well, we might not be like 10 times better than chocolate in certain aspects, but we will be 10 times more nutritive than chocolate. And we thought, one way to do that is like people are always looking for more protein. People are always now looking for more fiber. I think that's kind of gotten a little more in the consciousness with like the Poppies and the Olippops of the world. And then I think there's like a large subset of people that still like sugar, that just like it much more reduced.
Sure.
So like everything's got less sugar than a 70% dark chocolate bar, but still taste in that sweetness level of like a Hershey's kind of milk chocolate.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, people can feel that price point of, but that's on the producer side. The consumer side, I'm sure maybe they feel some of it, but if they're getting really nice chocolate, I think some are willing to splurge, $9-10 on a bar of chocolate.
Well, unfortunately, it seems like that might be some of the direction that like just normal chocolate's going. It's taken a while to get into consumer price spikes, and I think it's also been well hidden by the fact that there's actually just been an incredible amount of inflation on groceries the last few years generally.
Sure.
But it's definitely been hitting businesses since the summer. And then I feel like it's just starting to kind of come to that space where like you go to a Whole Foods and even just like the classic chocolates that they have there, they're like their first party brand is going up by $1 or $2. It's getting really, really crazy. But I mean, I think that was the thing that, and kind of why we talk about the tree and the bean and sort of the serendipitous start. Because I think from our standpoint, like we really started from this thesis of like, we should all be eating more of mesquite pods. Like they're super delicious. They're very nutritive. By themselves, they're packed with protein and fiber. They're super like delicious and sweet. They bring these beautiful complex flavors, and they've been consumed for generations wherever they've grown. Indigenous people is from anywhere from like 20 to 30% of their caloric intake in regions where it was native to. And so it's been something that's been around forever, and it still is very present in certain places. But for whatever reason in the United States, it's all but fallen out of the collective consciousness.
I wonder, how people, say big pharma is like big chocolate. Like, is there like, don't talk about it.
I don't think people really even thought of it as a chocolate alternative until this guy kind of looked at it. Because I mean, the thing we have scanned this, and I mean, we're very open to being wrong, but we've not seen anybody else using it as a chocolate alternative anywhere in the world, especially even in places where it grows. And that may also just be that chocolate, isn't necessarily like has not been a long-term product worldwide and everywhere. And whereas mesquite has been in a lot of places even before cacao-based products made it there. So I don't know that people were even thinking like, I need to try to make this a chocolate.
Interesting.
I think honestly, our understanding of it really just comes from the fact that like we have historically in the United States wanted to grow like 5 crops. And if you look at like both the history of the farming as an industry, farming as a government regulated body and supported body, it really just keeps pushing us to make more and more corn, wheat, soy, rice.
Yeah.
I mean, and also a lot of farm regulation for the last 30 or 40 years has really pushed to farm consolidation, which also really hurts the ability for us to see like a wide variety of biodiversity in what is being farmed.
What do you mean consolidation?
So literally like the family farm being sold to big farm corp.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I don't know if you know Dr. Dave, but Dr. Dave just talked about that. He was running for Senate last year, and but he got into politics because he wrote a bill into law to provide up to $10,000 to families that had children that were victims of gun violence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then he has a free clinic on the north side for the uninsured. And then he wanted to fight food insecurity by becoming a farmer.
Yeah.
And he really experienced what it was like to come up with the amount of money it took to fight the large corporations buying up this land.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult and was really kind of pushed in that direction through a lot of federal farm policy kind of coming out of the Reagan years. And I think, the big thing that we've been trying to do our entire existence as humans is grow enough food for us to not worry about starving. And I think most of the policies that we have today were made under this guise of, we had the Great Depression, we had the wars through that kind of early part of the 1900s. There was an ever-growing set of people to feed in America. Yeah. And we also had to feed them in faraway places. We had to think about shelf stability. And all of those were really good like innovations that are super necessary. I think what happens is you just see an overinvestment in something that's working really, really well and kind of a little bit of a forgetting that
the innovative or the how do we move from survival to thrive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That there's also like you can eat just these 5 vegetables and you'll live, but like we're not necessarily designed to just subsist on those historically. Our bodies weren't meant to just do that. And so
like on top of that, like the farmland's not supposed to only be making those types of products, and you're continuing to pull different things out of the topsoil. It's like you do need some biodiversity in order to make sure that our topsoil is not being eroded. In the case of like mesquite, it's like they're not really growing a ton in the desert just because of the climate that it's in. There's definitely a lot of farming communities. I mean, so much is going on in Arizona for like lettuce and things like that. But we're not looking at other types of products and different types of biodiverse like agricultural products that we can actually bring into the larger food system. And we think that like, well, we should probably reconsider that. We can't kind of like genetically modify our way into continuing to optimize for like full stomachs. We should also kind of look at a biodiverse, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like solution to make sure that we're not just surviving like Ben's saying, but like thriving. And I think that mesquite is able to kind of like fit into that mold a little bit more. I mean, there's 45 different species. Like Ben was saying, they grow everywhere aside from Europe. And
so could they grow in Illinois?
It's a little too cold.
Yeah.
So
sorry, just on every continent.
Every continent.
So it has to be warm though.
Okay. Yeah. Like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Like
they really want dry, hot areas. That's where they thrive, which is also something that we find really fascinating because, as Bob was saying, that's not necessarily what you traditionally think of as the most productive farmlands in any given space. In Texas, where they do grow most commonly in the United States, or most broadly, I should say, though there is definitely them in trees in New Mexico and Arizona and parts of California. They're also trying to grow soy, they're trying to grow alfalfa, they're trying to grow other plants that need a lot of water. And I think what's ended up happening, and I think one of the things that I find always so fascinating is why do we think certain plants are nuisance plants and certain other plants are super highly prized and beautiful, whether they're like ornamental plants that we want in our home, like how much does a bird of paradise plant cost, right? And but then there's these other plants like amaranth that grows on the side of the highway that's super nutritious and calorie dense and actually pretty delicious, but we think of it as a weed, right? And mesquite has kind of like edged its way into being considered a weed in Texas, like a nuisance plant actually. And so I think why it was
simply from an aesthetic perspective, or
actually because
why
they're very hard to kill.
Yeah.
Very, very, very hard to kill.
Let's eat it.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, we went down to Texas last year as well, just to kind of like visit some of the different vendors and the different people that are working with mesquite there. And like, they call it like the devil with roots, because it just soaks up all the water in the region. The other thing is like, in like, you know, Texas is huge on cattle. There's so much beef that comes from there. Mesquite has like these big thorns on it that just kind of cut up their cows.
Yeah. Cows love to eat it because it's super delicious and calorie dense and all of that stuff too.
But then if you get those cuts, and you can't really sell the leather then for as high of a price because there's these damages to it. So they're just like, let's just cut it down. Let's burn it. Let's poison it. Which
is actually why the most common use case you encounter mesquite in America is like barbecue. It's literally using the wood to smoke meat.
It's kind of an interesting.
Yeah. So that's the same mesquite.
Yeah,
it's the same mesquite.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's in the food system in one way, but it's just this really interesting cyclical, like, it gives us food, but we want to burn it down to cook other food that we decided to bring in. It's really interesting. That's kind of like why, you know, I bought the mesquite flower and it was like, okay, this tastes good. I don't know much about it. And then just kept reading on it. And I was like, this is cool. This is really cool. Why are we not doing anything with it?
I mean, its nutrition is amazing.
Yeah.
It has a lot of the same antioxidants and polyphenols of a cacao. Like, it really does look a lot like what we call superfoods. And the whole sustainability piece is just a thread that, like, I think we keep kind of pulling on, and it keeps unraveling into a larger and more interesting story.
Okay.
But I think it was kind of when we really learned about those three things, and Bob, being involved in the food system sort of at a deeper level than many other people for a while, you know, said, you know, chocolate, and actually we're not talking about it a lot right now, but coffee is having a similar set of issues, looking like it's coming this direction that cocoa is feeling right now, which is, you know, there's a heavy reliance on a very small like land mass for almost all of it. Any weather issues, crop disease issues, things like that are going to have an outsized effect just from one region. And the other thing about cacao is that it like any other living thing, it has a lifespan. And at some point, the trees stop producing pods, they die, and then it takes another something like 8 to 10 years for new trees to go from seed to starting to fruit. And a lot of orchards in those primary growing regions are getting towards the end of their productive lives and need to be replanted and reseeded essentially from the beginning. And so, you know, I think you had kind of an insight that there was a bit of a tidal wave starting to come our direction in chocolate, though we hadn't really felt it in many places yet. And just felt like also on top of that, I mean, there's a lot of very well documented issues associated with the sustainability of cacao, the way that it treats the people that are involved in the farming process and the processing in various regions of it. Even the current situation that we have right now, where cacao prices are spiking, you know, 5 to 6x what they were just a year ago. You know, none of that money is making it, none of that price increase is making it to the farmers. They're actually making less income right now because they're not able to meet those original contracts that they had set at pricing that they had agreed 2 years ago in futures contracts. And so the people that are like most impacted by this shortage and this issue, the people that are, you know, in the region where it's happening, actually getting none of the benefit.
And I think that like that was one thing that, I mean, I think Tony's Chocolate Only has done like a really good job of like, hey, there's slavery in cocoa farming. Like we're going to make the first slavery-free cocoa. And I think that was one thing that also kind of came to me where I was like, well, if this already has like, you know, this is one company trying to do something that's better, while the rest of, you know, what the other 95% of cocoa, let's say, is still like, well, whatever, labor practices.
Can you describe elaborate on a slavery? Like, what does that mean?
So, I mean, I need to read a little bit more onto it, but the way that I've kind of understood it is that there's a lot of like child labor that goes into it, or forced labor.
And different countries just have different rules, though, or
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
and that's how they get away with that,
or no rules, or different enforcement of the rules locally based on different power dynamics. I mean, cocoa in the regions where it grows is a huge cash crop, right? Mm-hmm. It's extremely important to those countries, general economies. Mm-hmm. And so not having enough labor to farm the cocoa is a huge problem for them.
And a lot of those are like,
and this isn't to, excuse any of that by any stretch of the imagination, maybe just to sort of understand the dynamics which lead to this. But yeah, you're talking about a situation where people are sometimes brought in on, sort of like we'll pay you this certain amount, it will sponsor you, and then kind of the rug's pulled out from underneath them, and it's very difficult for them to get back to their homes, or, just other ways that basically don't show that there's a will or the ability to leave that situation.
Yeah. Or, I mean, farming life is very difficult, obviously, and a lot of farmers are like, we have a ton of work to do. I need to pull my kid out of school so that we can get the harvest, we can like meet these contracts. And I don't think that all of it is like intentionally like we're setting out to be awful.
Almost reminiscent of the pizza shop.
yeah, exactly.
Right, to a different degree, probably.
To a different degree, for sure.
Yeah. But definitely, I mean, I think pulling your children into your family's labor is a very long-term historical practice, actually, for humans. But totally that. I mean, but yeah. So I think to the point that Bob is making about just those practices, those labor practices generally, like, I don't think we were fully aware, I wasn't fully aware of just all that goes into a bar of chocolate that I enjoy, and also just how incredibly inexpensive what used to be such an enormous luxury is today, where I can go and get a Hershey's bar for, at this time, less than $2, and just enjoy something that came from literally the other side of the planet. In order to, and is a very not super easy plant to grow. It has very specific environmental requirements. It needs a lot of water.
The processing's not even very easy too. There's so much different types of fermentation that go into it. There's so much different milling. When Blommer closed down, we actually went and walked the facility.
What's Blommer?
Blommer, when you go down to...
is that why it smells like chocolate over
there?
Exactly.
Yeah,
okay.
Des Plaines.
So Blommer's a brand or just a factory?
I think they were mostly just a factory for other people's brands.
I've never heard that name, but it always smells like chocolate.
It always, Okay. While you smell chocolate, there was a big company that was down there. They've closed that, I think, last year. We bought a couple pieces of equipment from them, but in doing that, we were able to just like walk through the whole thing. We're like, oh my gosh.
This is what it could be.
Yeah. One day I was like, Ben, can we buy this? And he was like, I don't know how we're going to move that into our space. Like,
I don't know how we're going to get it
I also
out of
don't think we need to do like 1 million pounds of chocolate a minute. So I think maybe we should.
Going back to like the reel that you guys are hand making these, like, how special, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, how do we keep that charm as you continue to scale?
Yeah.
I mean...
I think for us, the big thing that we're really thinking about is how do we keep the benefit being passed through to the people that are responsible for farming this product for us over time. I think our goal and our hope for this is that this significantly like transcends our own brand, that other people are interested in using this as a part of their own products as well. And obviously chocolate bars are a very small part of the overall chocolate market, and chocolate as an ingredient is a category that is maybe 25 to 30% of the products in an average supermarket have chocolate as a flavor or as an ingredient chips, in some way, right?
Cookies,
now we're thinking
chocolate milk.
Oh my goodness.
And so we talk about cacao and some of the issues associated with it. I mean, that's an industry, an agricultural industry that's several centuries old, right? And have huge powerful embedded interests in how it functions and how it continues to function. And what also gets us so excited about mesquite as a food crop is how sort of early it is. There's not a huge, hyper entrenched existing supply chain and market for it. There's a huge supply available. the amount of biomass of mesquite trees across just this set of continents in the Americas is absolutely mind-blowing, and almost none of it is actually farmed. But we have the opportunity with this to really like start from scratch on an agricultural supply chain, thinking about the modern practices of trade and equity and farming. I mean, one of the things that we do think a lot about with this is, a lot of the greenhouse gases that are emitted into this world broadly are based on land use change, whether we're taking a forest and turning it into a parking lot, a building, a park, or a farm. And every year that you're replanting things, it's a little different with orchard trees. But you're tilling up the soil, you're releasing a lot of carbon that's been sequestered in the top layers of it. And so, we want to make sure that the processes by which we start changing land into mesquite groves is also really considered and thought about using the most modern and sustainable practices as well. And so that's, I think, what makes us the most excited about what we get to do here. Chocolate, I love chocolate. It's obviously this incredibly emotional product. It's a big reason we started with chocolate is that, nobody has no opinion on chocolate. We originally would have said nobody dislikes chocolate. We have learned that that's not true.
Oh, shit.
There are definitely people that dislike
people
it.
Allergic to chocolate.
People that are allergic to chocolate, to caffeine. There's all sorts of things that you learn on this journey. But everybody understands chocolate as a very, not just food product, but like sort of emotional, like meme, like it's a part of our culture. It's a part of our psyche in addition to being a part of the food that we eat. But I think deeper than that, Bob and I really wanted to make the ability for somebody in some different part of the world, whether that's the United States or elsewhere, that is struggling because they drew the lot of being born into a very poor agricultural community. On top of that, in a very arid desert area where it's hard to grow stuff, that those folks can have more opportunity from the land and the space that they're, able to occupy and that they were given in life. And so the idea of being able to make a confection using ingredients that are able to be sourced locally from the United States, the idea of being able to give back to communities in very arid climates and help them find new ways to gain income, that's really what kind of drives us. And being able to also help cacao and the chocolate shortages, I mean, that's something we're super happy about and super incredibly grateful that this kind of larger moment is happening, which gives us the opportunity to propel this a little bit. But in the end, what we're really trying to do is, sort of that old camper's logic of leaving it a little bit better than you found it. We grew up in very agricultural communities. We see how agriculture can benefit and detriment a community, whether that's the practices that are being done, the labor that's being brought in or sourced locally from the community that it's there. And being able to kind of go back into a space, for me especially, back into a space that is so deeply human, food, and having enough food and having the right food and what even is the right food, that's a whole fun can of worms to start taking apart. But I mean, being able to have an impact that both can be very individual and very on a personal level with the person enjoying the chocolate bar, but also behind that sits this huge chain of benefit that can reach out into these huge number of different places in the world is I think the thing that just really
lights a fire.
Yeah.
It's very fulfilling.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
We kind of really looked at, have you seen Guayaquil, that yerba mate brand ever?
Yeah.
We listened to an interview by them at some point and we were like, oh, people can make a business that is going to impact positively the environment, the people that are growing it. Okay. It took them 20 years.
Market-driven regeneration. And I feel like that's just this hugely powerful kind of theme that sort of resonated with us as we think about what we're trying to do with mesquite. There's a lot available and there's a lot of communities that would benefit greatly from having this. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be a market for the end product. There needs to be somebody saying I want that and I want it in large quantities. And today, for whatever reason, there isn't. And where we kind of thought the big unlock is that there needs to be a use case for it. And it needs to be a use case which kind of slots into of a use case that we're already sort of familiar with. And it's going to be different already. It's going to, it's weird. It's an alt chocolate. It's mesquite. What the heck's that thing? Right. But so we had all of this sort of like interesting exoticism to it already just from trying to make chocolate from mesquite or make any product from mesquite for that matter. And so that's really where we were initially focused as well, which was how do we create a product that is already sort of available, present, understandable by people so that then we can kind of totally break it open after that and kind of show them what else is happening.
People are going to start screaming from the rooftops of what you guys are up to if they aren't already.
That's our hope, is that over time we just get a lot of people excited about it and enjoying the chocolate. And
like imagine if you partnered with other like pastry chefs and they started using this instead of cocoa.
Yeah. That's the hope. We've been working with a few restaurants, but they've been pushing it into like savory, like moles. Okay. They've been working with pastry chefs is definitely something that we're like really hoping to start doing. I mean, there's such great pastry shops in the city too. That we've been like, when's the right time? Is this like there's kind of this. I think especially us both being kind of like product people, we're like, oh, the product's never quite ready. It's never quite done. It's never quite perfect. Like it doesn't taste 1-to-1 like Barry Callebaut. Like, are we going to like just blow it out of the water and Mindy's never going to talk to us again? Like, what are we going to do? So, but that's definitely the dream. I think that like what Ben was saying is like just using it in all these different contexts is really exciting for us.
So wait, have you had conversations with Mindy?
No, we've dropped off a few bars with them, but you never know who's trying stuff. And like
what about Pretty Cool Ice Cream?
Oh, we haven't really talked with them. No.
We did a small engagement with Vaca's Ice Cream in their Lincoln Square location, which was really, really cool. And I think like for us, we're also realizing too with, bakeries and things like that, they actually generally in food service, it's a little bit different market than consumer in that they already have their own kind of brand and what they're trying to bring. And they have this chocolate croissant that they've been making the same way for like 3 years. It's arguably why 10% of their customers come there each week. And they don't want to mess with that. You know what I mean? The prices of cocoa are definitely like making them more interested in looking somewhere different. And that's something that we've been taking advantage of for sure. Yeah. But I think what we've come to realize is that there's also a huge benefit to not just replacing chocolate with our product in like a pastry, but actually just like using part our product and part chocolate, so you can use way less chocolate if you want to.
There you go. Wow.
And so also like for us, the long-term goal of us with this company has been to make it just able to be used in all of these same ways that you currently use a chocolate bar, or just chocolate broadly, or cocoa as a flavoring, or cocoa powder, all of those different form factors.
A mocha latte.
Exactly.
Yeah, easy.
And for us, we always knew that was going to be mostly done by other people besides us, with us partnering with them and providing it to them in the right form factor.
These other makers become your champions.
Exactly.
Become Mez's champions.
Exactly.
Become Mesquite's champions. So what about indie like pastry chefs, indie makers that are maybe more price sensitive or are more open to helping the environment or helping make change in this level?
So I think that you're basically, I mean, what big part of why we were wanting to come on your podcast, why we are like really starting to talk a lot more about what we're doing these days than where we were even maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, is we are just wanting to do all of that way more so. We want to, anybody who's interested in trying our product, who wants to work with us, like that's something that we're pursuing really deeply. I think to Bob's point, like when you're starting with a very new product in a very new space, it's also a product that's like an alternative to something that exists already. We were kind of cautious in that we wanted to make sure that we were creating something that was going to give that genuine feeling of the original product of chocolate to somebody. And, the other thing that's really interesting about how the company kind of came to be is when we started a year ago, as Bob was saying, all of the stuff with cocoa was not happening in the same way that it is right now. And so well, we knew food service and selling into making chocolate being our Mez, I should say, being an ingredient in other people's products was the end goal. We sort of assumed that we were going to have to just do a consumer-focused product initially to even get anybody aware of it.
Sure.
Why would you have a chocolate made from mesquite? Why would you have a chocolate made from anything other than cocoa? Like, what's wrong with cocoa? Everybody's telling me it's super healthy for me. It's a superfood. Like, I should be eating more of it. Stuff like that. And so we spent a lot of time formulating the bars with the improved nutrition because we wanted to have something that stood out against chocolate, the beautiful branding, all of that stuff, which we're still super happy we did, because communicating to people, trying to understand what a person finally does want from a product like this is super, super beneficial. And having a consumer brand to still have a name and a face for mesquite-based anything that isn't barbecue is going to be ongoingly useful for us.
Yeah.
But having just the macro event of chocolate pricing going through the roof and continuing to stay that way for a long period of time, it's giving us this opportunity to sort of reverse course and go straight into food service with a little less of a focus on the consumer brand as the initial kind of starting place for that. And so, when we were down in South America visiting our suppliers, Bob and I used it as an opportunity to also have an offsite where we really thought about what we were trying to do this year. So one of the things that we really had been straddling for the last 6 months was, okay, well, we did all this work on a consumer brand. We have this beautiful set of products already. Should we just keep that pathway going and really, really just all in, nothing else, just do that? Or do we kind of respond to what we're seeing here, that there's actually this huge opportunity available to us on this other side of the business more immediately, and not drop, because the consumer brand is incredibly important to us, but really just start going after this other side much more quickly with much more kind of focus. And so I think if you look at some Chicago bakeries soon, hopefully you'll be seeing more and more, whether or not they're talking about it or they're not.
It seems natural that they're more of an amplifier than just, you're not one-to-one anymore, you're B2B. And
exactly. I mean, we kind of also think about how like Oatly got really big in America, and kind of there had been a lot of other alternative milks. Almond milk at the time was sort of the seemingly the winner of the non-dairy milks. And then all of a sudden, at every coffee shop where I was in New York, a little bottle of oat milk, or I guess carton of oat milk, was showing up. And it was, for me, one of the first milk alternatives that tasted really good with coffee, and didn't kind of fight the coffee in some way. And I know everybody has their own flavor experiences, but I feel like that was something that was kind of their like edge into your home by first not making you have to spend the however much money on a carton that it was. You could try a little bit in your coffee, realize what you would use it for, and then kind of decide whether or not this was, something you wanted to bring into your home. And so we definitely see bakeries that way, but I also think we want to be very open and work with folks that, we would love to have our brand be a part of whatever they do. But if they also just want to use our chocolate and not have our brand be a part of it, that's also stuff that we're open to, because again, we kind of go back to, we're trying to build as big of a market for mesquite pods, starting in the United States as possible, so that we can go and incentivize more grove planting. We can incentivize farmers in America to start growing it.
I can't imagine how overwhelmed you guys are with where in this circle do I tackle today?
It's a lot. Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest thing in the offsite was is this just an ego thing where we want the chocolate bar to be out there and be on the Whole Food or within the Sprouts, or is the mission actually mesquite needs to be not even awareness for us, but awareness for the
mesquite.
Exactly, and we're the mesquite needs to be the new soy, or the new maybe just the new peanut. I mean, peanuts, and you get a peanut butter flavored confectionery in any different way, but you're well, why isn't mesquite in that same conversation? People love the taste of peanuts, and they love the taste of chocolate, they love vanilla, they love all these single ingredient flavor explorations in certain senses, and we're well, mesquite should be in that conversation. It can be a spice, it can be its own flavor component. We should just make mesquite as big as possible.
We wanted to kind of live up there with a vanilla or a cinnamon or a chocolate, where it's a flavor that you kind of can call to. You describe other flavors in terms of, but it's chicken. Also a piece of food, right? It's an actual physical thing I can point to too. And so yeah, I think in order for us to do that, we have to also respect that like our role in it will be big to start with, but ever less important as time goes on. And that's kind of what we're hoping, is that we can get other people super excited about being involved in this as well and wanting to use our product or use, mesquite for different reasons, whether it's as a chocolate alternative or just a flavorant, a spice. We've had, when we were in Texas, it being a location where there's a lot of mesquite in America, and especially Austin, but San Antonio, we really felt this too. It's really a unique kind of community of people looking kind of at their own state and what are these things that we have everywhere, but for whatever reason we're not using. And so we met bakers that were making delicious breads with mesquite, not even gluten-free breads necessarily, just amazing breads, amazing cookies. And
teas, like really interesting teas.
So there's starting to be like a growing understanding of it. And even within the United States, we're certainly not the first people to be saying people should be eating this. Nowhere near the beginning of that chain of people. We're actually lucky to inherit, many people saying that this should be something we're doing, because that's the little that we were able to find out there was what drew us to it.
But they didn't mention chocolate alternatives? Like what were they talking about?
Just literally how it is delicious, it is nutrition dense, and it's super sustainable.
And it just didn't spark in their head?
It seems like a lot of folks that were like using mesquite are just like, again, it kind of goes into that gluten-free flour kind of thing where it's like, look, it can be, I mean, when you think of like the way that people like to cook even at home, you're like, we've talked to people even in Chicago that are from Texas, from Arizona, they're like, oh, the thing that I have to rake out of my yard as a kid, or like, oh, I used to eat those when I was walking around playing with my friends. And it's actually been kind of fun and funny when we were down in Texas. People are like, well, you guys are from Chicago and you care about mesquite? Like, what are you?
Amazing.
Have you guys even seen it? Does it grow up there? Like, what are you guys doing?
And actually, to that point, I don't think we had seen a live tree before we went to Texas.
No, we've tried to grow them in our apartment, but that's about as far as it goes.
So what was it like meeting the makers in South America?
Oh my gosh, it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, just generally speaking, everywhere that we went, just people were incredible and incredibly gracious and incredibly welcoming. But I think, meeting the people that actually do the farming and seeing like what their life was like, which was actually a good life. Like it was, I think, a life that like I would have found somewhat difficult to really inhabit, especially at this time in my
Let me pause real quick.
Yeah.
I can cut it. I have spare batteries. Let me see if I can.
Take
go for it.
I feel like we still have a lot. So we're back, and we were
talking about meeting the growers.
Yeah, you made it down to South America recently, and you met the makers, the growers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really surprised me was how invested in mesquite the communities that we visited already were. A big part of why we're able to buy it in South America is because there's enough other local uses, whether it be for feeding humans or animals, that there's a local market to actually create this. And when we were meeting with the farmers, we also had an opportunity to meet with some of the agricultural and forestry ministers and from both like the provinces that we were in, and also the countries. Sorry, we went to Argentina and Peru, and what was really super fascinating was how they had already been dealing with issues that they had caused from previous like poor agricultural practices. With mesquite for a while now, but what they were really, really hoping for was basically for a place to start selling this, to give them more reason to actually plant it in other places where it could be useful. We learned a lot about how mesquite interacts with its environment, and we also learned a lot about how different agricultural practices lead to different outcomes, especially in communities where there isn't just a ton of water. And in the case of the specific groves that we were visiting, where we get our specific beans from, they had done basically flood irrigation from a local river of their farmland for decades. But in order to do that and not create issues for yourself, you essentially have to build draining into your fields. They call it tile draining. And if you don't, one of the outcomes can be that you just build up a ton of salt in your soil over a several decades of irrigating it that way. Where the salt exactly comes from, I am not sure.
I think it's what we've kind of
learned.
Water,
or is it?
It's in the water, and because it's not draining, the water evaporates, but the salt isn't able to go anywhere. So after decades and decades, maybe the water's not very salty, but
there's small amounts of dissolved minerals that then just become in excess. And so they were left with land that was like 6 times the level of saltiness that would allow them to grow vegetables in.
Enter mesquite.
Exactly. And so they'd been studying this for a while. We also realized that probably 2 of the world's experts in the tree itself, reside down there and had been involved. We went to, it was called an experimental farm, I think in Spanish, but I'm trying to think of the way, if that's what I would call it in English, probably.
Yeah. An experimental grove, like una huerta experimental.
So it was basically sponsored by both like a university, like an academic institution, but also several like NGOs, both within that country, but also around the world. I think Italy was involved in one of them. And they're really just studying mesquite as well as a few other arid climate plants, and also creating like versions of it that sort of show really like promising traits. Like they produce a lot of pods. They grow very quickly from seed to pod. They
more frost resistance too. Like you asked, like, does it grow in Illinois? No, but you remember like Texas, I guess even recently was freezing. Florida. I know. We were like, what? I didn't realize that there was like New Orleans
leave Chicago because they hated the snow, and here we are. Snow followed. You brought the snow.
Our parents were like joking. They're like, oh, we were supposed to go to Florida, but then we were like, well, they've got 10 inches down there. Like, we're just gonna stay in Michigan. Not
really. At least we have plows.
Yeah.
That too. Already.
But I mean, they're crossing many different types of mesquite, different species, and trying to see, like, we talked about those like spines that kind of like cut people up, or not people, I guess cows.
Yeah.
But it also makes it really difficult to harvest itself for for people, like the people that are working and harvesting it.
Sure.
So looking at varieties that have like smaller spines, no spines. They're also like freeze resistant. There's a couple different varieties that would still have outlasted these deep freezes that have been going on in Texas. Wow. And I don't know. I thought that was really interesting to see.
Really interesting. Also, just one point, by spines, you also mean thorns.
Thorns,
which is another, they call them spines.
Espinas.
Yeah,
that's why I
in
was
Spanish, which was, but yeah, in case you're not sure what a spine is on a tree, it's a thorn.
Yeah.
And they're very, very thick, long. Yeah. They can be, at least on some of them. And so I think that was one of the things that, amongst many things that just really blew us away when we were down there, which was just how much studying has been going on this tree, how much many people in that area already look at it as just such an important part of what's going on for them right now, but also their future. I mean, it's to the point where they don't call mesquite by its name. They just call it the tree in that region because it's so prevalent.
Okay.
It provides so much shade, and whether it's ornamental in the city or it's a part of your house, like kind of ornamental plants, or it's part of your farm, it's just a huge part of the overall ecosystem there. And so I think, the other thing that was really interesting is how, some of those problems that we had seen solutions to with mesquite groves of like land that was too salty to really be able to do much with agriculture. There's still a lot of land that's like that down there that they would like to plant groves in, but it's not free to plant.
So where do you start in this cycle, right?
Exactly.
So it's like here you are cultivating demand for this product.
It's like kind of like a Russian nesting doll of different chicken and egg problems to kind of sort out. And you're like, okay, do we drive demand? What is demand? Oh, well, then we're gonna run out of supply. Well, if we do supply, like when are we gonna grow these groves? Like who's gonna get the money to put those groves in? We don't want to buy land in South America or like Texas necessarily. So like we have to show that this is a cash crop for folks that already own that land. But we have to drive demand for the mesquite. So it's,
were you able to bring some of this stuff to them?
Yeah.
What did they think?
They loved it. They were like, whoa, you can do this with mesquite? Yeah. So the processor that we were like chatting with has two people that like work the line and do like a lot of the food science and like quality control and stuff on that. And they're like, we've only really had this in like the syrups mainly and the coffee, and we gave them the chocolate, and they DM'd us on Instagram recently like, how did you guys make this? Like, we've never had anything like this. Like, you can still taste the mesquite, but like, I don't need the chocolate thing if this is what you guys are making.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really cool to go back
cool.
and share what we've kind of developed with their product, and kind of see that full circle thing kind of go on too.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I guess mapping out 2025, like who are you contacting? What are the pain points? What's the bottleneck? What's the plan?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, we're really seeing what can be possible with this, and seeing a general kind of situation both broadly in the market, but also very specifically in Chicago, for us to make this much bigger than what it is today.
Three makers come to mind. They were all recent guests. Justin Loria. So do you know Francis Almeida?
No.
From Side Practice Coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So the last guest from Conan, they're opening up a restaurant in Bowmansville near North Center, like Foster and Damon. Okay. And it's a Masubi restaurant. It started as a Spam Masubi pop-up, and it's a full-blown restaurant, but not unsimilar to what Francis has done. He has created a coffee shop that has put on other people's side practice. And he really gets to identify who's at what part of that journey, and when someone is ready to take the leap to a maybe brick and mortar, Francis is usually already plotting and scheming. And it's like you would be great for this, and so they have this restaurant space coming, and they're gonna, it'll be a pop up for other makers that want future, their own restaurant concepts and things like that. But they have a pastry. He has a pastry shop coming up soon by Justin Larius, called Del Sur, in that area. So that's just one pastry chef that came to mind. Formerly another chef, Dan, now known as Bad Butter, but he formerly was known as Dan the Baker.
Oh, I was going to say, I've heard a lot about Dan the Baker.
Yeah. So he can't no longer use that name. There's another Dan the Baker in, I think, Ohio. So he transitioned to...
always the bane of my existence,
and then a handmade ice cream maker. Her brand is Ice Cream Girl.
We actually know her. Yeah,
Sarah.
We've done a couple
Sarah
of her.
Cochran.
We've done a couple of farmers markets with her.
Love
Sarah.
She's great.
She's awesome.
We were hooked on her pints, so I can see some mesquite in her work.
Yeah, 100%.
We totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I think this year, we have a really interesting gamut of everything from very large companies who deal with chocolate, who are staring down a big issue for kind of their
so they're not
livelihood.
Opposed.
No.
Oh, good.
They're actually kind of
very interested.
A little scared about like what their prospects are.
Oh,
I mean, they see this at a much deeper and more intimate level than most of the rest of the populace see it, and they're seeing a very troublesome situation to keeping their profit that they're used to having available to them.
So interesting.
So we have conversations happening with companies like that. We're reaching much more into the Chicago community, but also we have a lot of friends and interest in New York and Texas from when we went down there, of partnering with them to do things with their restaurants or their ice cream shops or bakeries or breweries.
Like, what's your favorite place to get a milkshake?
In town?
It's like can you imagine if Portillo's redid their
great.
chocolate cake shake with that mesquite?
That'd be incredible. The only one that comes to mind that I love milkshakes, but the last one I think I've really gotten was like from Fatso's Last Stand. But I think that's just because it's around the corner from
a hit and run today. Seriously,
was there?
A woman died.
Oh,
what?
Wow.
Yeah, right in front of Fatso's.
Oh my God! No, jeez, that's so.
That's terrible.
That's awful. I have no idea. I don't. The one down on Chicago.
Yeah, Oakley in Chicago.
Yeah,
I used to live right around that. Fatso's.
Oh, gotcha. That's the one that I go to get. I had no idea.
Oh yeah, because there's another one. Yeah. Yep.
But geez, that's really sad. Is she okay at least?
No, she died.
Oh, she did die. Oh my God.
She died.
Wow, that's rough.
Oh, yeah. Just scumbags, just like hit and run.
Yeah.
Jeez. It's horrible.
It's like a crazy intersection too.
It is.
The whole Chicago Ave is just like. We went. To the Dark Matter on Chicago like right before this, and it's like depending on the time of day, you are like playing like Frogger trying to get across that street, and it's terrifying.
Also, as a driver too, it took forever to just go like a block. But yeah, it is one of the things that I think probably also just kind of reminds me of why Bob and I also took this jump when we did. I mean, I'm getting closer to my 40s than I am to my 30s. Well, I'm still in my 30s, but then I am 230, I should say. And life can be cut short at any moment. I mean, I think one of the things that I repeat to myself a lot is kind of a meditation of like, this could be the last time that I'm doing this thing, right? At any moment. And there's going to be a last time for everything in your life, and you often won't even know when that last time is going to happen. And I think that can be looked at sort of pessimistically, but I think it also just shows that every moment is the gift that you're getting. And, what do you want to do with that time? And I think, as Bob was kind of understanding more about mesquite and playing around with different applications that he could do with it, I think both of us were growing kind of a stale feeling in the careers that had really driven us and made us feel very excited up to that point with the companies that we were in. And
at that point, how often would you stay in touch, or did you live together in New York too? Like, how often would you be in touch at that point?
So we lived in New York at the same time. But I mean, Bob and I have, for much of our adult lives, probably at least talked to each other once a week or once every other week.
Okay. Yeah.
And when Bob was in New York, we talked quite a bit. Obviously now we talk every day for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, we would, Bob had been kind of mentioning just that he had this idea for mesquite chocolate. And at that point I just had a child. I was heads deep in launching a product at my previous company. And I was like, I don't really understand where you're coming from. Why are we trying to?
The proof of concepts weren't really something to sneeze at either. They were not.
They were fine, but I think I had that same question that I was worried everybody else would have, which is like, what's wrong with chocolate? Like, do we really need?
So you were already
yet
that far.
Another
You
alternative?
were thinking chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had bought like the different like machinery that I needed, chocolate molds. I had put it in my apartment and had a really loud white noise machine going for 3 days at a time.
With a wet grinder,
With a wet grinder, trying to figure out how to like temper. I mean, I had basically only worked in like alternative proteins and like brewing and distilling. So like going into something in confectionery, I was like, I'm kind of out of my element. Like trying to learn. I've baked, but not a lot of time. It's not.
This
something.
is definitely the story of a company of people
but it was
that are
compelling
kind of out
enough
of
for
their
you
elements.
it was compelling enough for you to try something new.
Yeah. And I mean, I've always like, I think that we both have always loved learning new things, digging really deep on things, and like sometimes to detrimental like effects. But I think that this has been like something that, going down to South America, seeing the growers, like we just keep finding different things that we want to keep digging deeper on this, and want to kind of like share it with people ultimately. So this has been like a really fun project that we've like totally trust each other on and have really decided.
And we knew we wanted to start a company with each other for a long time before we ever started Mez. And I think the thing that we had often kind of tried to figure out was what was the domain going to be? What was the product going to be? Both of us have backgrounds in product development, but mine was like electronics and fitness equipment and other crazy stuff like that, and nothing food wise other than working in a restaurant as a younger person.
But knowing how he's a food scientist, it's just like, what can we actually do?
Exactly. And so as he started to develop the idea a little bit more, and both of us kind of hit that point where I think we were sort of putting our heads up after having our heads down, sort of working really hard in a specific direction and kind of just thinking about like what is next for us. And I think for me, having my first child, which I still only have one, but definitely it's a huge transition point in your life where just a lot of who you are, who you thought of as yourself changes, and some of it goes away. A lot more comes back in this, in the case of having a child and having this amazing new being in your life that's also very difficult from time to time. But I think it just kind of pushed me to say, we've been talking about doing some of these things that feel really hard and scary, like starting our own business for a while, and I think now I realize that we just need to do it now. That's really all that kind of came to mind. Is just you need to do it now. And it just felt like a kind of an ever-growing sort of voice that was harder and harder to ignore. And then when we finally just stopped ignoring it, and it came at just the right time where we had an idea that was compelling enough to both of us. And I think I was a little skeptical about like why we needed a chocolate alternative initially until I started learning a lot more about mesquite. And then I was like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. Like, yes, this definitely needs to be something that we spend time on. We try to make more and more important. Over time, I think I've started understanding so much more about the chocolate industry broadly and see how important this is, not just for the purpose of creating something different, but because we're overtaxing cocoa right now. I mean, we're already having supply issues. The demand is expected to double over the next 10 years by multiple like analyst firms' estimations. And that's a really scary prospect, to where something like a chocolate bar may go back to being a very serious luxury for many, many people, and an unaffordable or unavailable luxury. And actually, in some parts of the world, as of right now, that's already starting to happen in places that have less general purchasing power, like Eastern Bloc, Eastern European countries. Carob chocolates are being, carob is another actually distantly related to mesquite plant that has been used in Europe to make chocolate alternatives for some time. That's being marketed as, the type of chocolate that if you can't afford cocoa-based chocolate that you can, kind of enjoy with your family for this holiday season or this last holiday season. And so we know that there's, like, again, we love chocolate. We're not trying to say anything, despite all of the things that can be negative associated with cocoa. I don't think anybody feels like they're actively doing something evil by eating a chocolate bar, and I don't think you should necessarily by any stretch of the imagination, but being able to just step into a market that has a lot of problems right now, and some of those are just structural based on how much we love it and how little we can produce of it, that we can kind of help with that too, and that's super exciting for us as well.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add on that.
That's amazing. What do your parents think?
They're super excited, actually.
Yeah.
They've supported us through all of our crazy ideas, whether that was me just kind of moving to China without a super like put together plan, or Bob's case of going to
Spain for
2
years
to study food science abroad. I think they look at what we do as always with like an eye of excitement and curiosity and a little perplexion, I think, too. But we keep them really engaged.
Are they curious about it though?
Oh yeah.
I love that for you guys.
I mean, they love like because we don't have any like retail stores. Let
me see.
All right,
gotta pause that again. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. God. Yeah,
that happens. It's a busy street.
Yeah,
not usually. I mean, it is and it isn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they love being a part of it, and yeah, to I think a point that we were just making, they actually send us ideas and thoughts and things about what to do all the time. They're constantly recommending places for us to look, and so it's actually It's nice.
And we've got like aunts and uncles that also are always sending us like, oh, did you guys look at this? You should talk to this person.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a big family, and they're all super interested in like what we're doing and why we're doing it. And they all kind of come at it in very different ways, which I think like a point that Ben made earlier of like, I mean, going into something with like ignorance is sometimes like your best. It's nice to not have all of the different conditions that you're going to need to meet.
Yeah.
Having like our family that's at varying degrees of like understanding what we're doing also like allows us to kind of like take a step back and be like, oh yeah, why are we doing it that way? Yeah. I mean, like even from a product development standpoint, like the first couple bars that we were actually selling, my mom was like, these do not taste like the chocolate that I like. And I was like, yeah, but this is good chocolate. Like, I mean,
I was kind of trying to do bean to bar dark chocolate flavor, and then it became very apparent very quickly that, oh yeah, that's not the chocolate most people spend a lot of their time eating, right?
As much as like dark chocolate is like this health food, most people still eat like milk chocolate or like chocolate coatings and things like that. And my mom, it was just funny. She would like hammer home where she's like, it's good. Don't get this like twisted, but it doesn't taste like the way that I like chocolate. Make it a little sweeter.
And at this point, you appreciate the honesty.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
totally.
really made us like completely pull back from like the way that we were doing product formulation to make something that's like, let's make it like much more appealing to a larger base of people that like eating chocolate.
That, and as we've talked about, the story is incredibly nuanced, and there's a lot of different layers to it that are very fun. And I think one of the ongoing struggles, and probably forever struggles for us, is trying to figure out how to put it in terms that are very easily digestible and very easy to take away. And so also being able to talk to our family and hear through the game of telephone what one cousin heard we were doing from 3 different, aunts and uncles, and kind of how that's traveled through, and sort of have like kind of a mirror back into what we think we're saying out there, but actually reflecting what's being heard. And that's been super useful for us as well.
What's the public's understanding of this?
And we're saying a lot how much of it is like the Charlie Brown teacher, wah 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 wah, chocolate, wah 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 wah, mesquite. And we can be a little verbose sometimes. So that's been super helpful as well. But yeah.
Okay. Let's say I want to hear like a potential pitch. And what if it was a coffee shop and maybe it's a mesquite syrup? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that continues to evolve for us. I think today our pitch is very much like, this is a product that gives you everything that you enjoy about chocolate. It's price competitive to chocolate, which is something that's becoming more and more true as we're able to drop the price of what we produce, but also as cocoa prices go up. It gives you this incredible nuance and depth of flavor that you love. Also, it's got all these amazing nutritive elements to it. It's sweet without being bitter, so we're able to use way less sugar, but still evoke like a level of sweetness that you're really looking for out of like maybe a milk chocolate product. It has a lot of its own protein, a lot of its own fiber, and a lot of that same antioxidant content that you're used to, but it's completely caffeine free, which is great for a lot of folks. And it comes from this incredibly sustainable source, one of the most sustainable food crops on the planet, in mesquite pods. And from there, you kind of judge how much more interest there is. Talk a little bit more about mesquite, and then I think that's basically what we've through a lot of farmers markets, a lot of in-person like relationships, have kind of understood that the most meaningful way for somebody to kind of take in a food is to start with, what is it doing for my taste buds, what's it doing for my stomach and the rest of my body, and then what's it doing for the world. And I think
make it personal first, right? Okay.
I think that like a lot of like coffee shops, people that work in back of house generally are like super interested in different flavors, new techniques of preparing something. So a lot of the time we just end up focusing on like the flavor of it, because it is so unique. I mean, it does have like this coconutty, cinnamony, like none of those elements are actually in it. So you can kind of push it into a lot of different ways, which from like even a product development standpoint for myself has been really interesting to kind of see what we can evoke from just this single sourced product, and like either add like some chufa flour to it, or add some carob, or add some koji, or do all these like very weird kind of like flavor explorations for people that we hope comes through when we give them the bar. But it does kind of like matter almost case by case. Some people are just like, is it cheaper? Okay, whatever, kick rocks. So
no, that's a good point.
Like they associate quality with cost.
Or like it's still not like making it cheaper for me, so I don't really care. Like
there's a lot to ask somebody to change over their formulations and do something, and you have to have some benefit to them. And as much as knowledge of the environmental impact of food has become much broader, it also has continuously been shown to not be a primary decision factor for the majority of consumers, and that's true of businesses as well. And I think as a new brand, it's kind of table stakes. Like you have to have it. And that's great, right? Who wants to support a new and upcoming person that's saying, I'm just going to be as bad as all of the worst offenders that are currently, running the markets. But on the flip side of it, it also means that it's not the point of differentiation that it maybe once was. And if you're not providing the flavor, the nutrition, and the cost that somebody wants, they're not going to choose your food just because it's more sustainable than something that does meet all of those points. And so I think what is continuing to be made easier for us is that we're now able to start really showing an economic benefit in addition to all of these other types of benefits that somebody who's running a business would love to be a part of, but also still needs to bring a little bit of money home after they've made all of their money and spent all of the money on all of the things that their business requires. And so that's something that's really becoming true for us in a way that it wasn't even like 3 or 4 months ago, because it's taken a while for prices to spike in cocoa. It's permeated different companies in different ways. I think there's been a lot of uncertainty around how long this is going to last, and I think that uncertainty persists, but so does the pricing. But I think the other thing that I kind of going back to, like, one of the reasons why I sometimes think that it's taken a long time for mesquite to gain traction again in the United States with the current population that's here. And I think part of it is because it has so much flavor in it that it really can be pushed in a lot of directions, whether it's something very spiced and cinnamony, whether it's something very sweet. There's honey notes, there's fruity notes, there's all of these different things. And when you're given just like this like tool, a lot of people given a tool won't necessarily make a masterpiece with it, right? Like there's almost this like it's so everything, you have to kind of let it be one thing too. And that's, I think, also the journey that we've been taking a lot in product development, which is, we talk to chefs, we love working with people in really explorationary kitchens. There's a couple of people that we've been able to work with, especially in Texas, that are just doing things that are mind-blowing with it, right? But while that's super fun and that needs to exist because that's what helps inspire the next generation of more broad-based products, most of us are used to encountering food in very specific ways. And in order for us to be able to like adopt a different version of that, it still needs to fit into some part of our life as that food already existed in. And so I think, we looked at this just consistently as this amazing tool in need of a use case, right? Like a hammer that's just out searching for its nail. And what we're really invested in and what we really believe deeply is that chocolate is kind of that expression that the base ingredient of mesquite needed in order to gain a popular foothold in our mindset. And then from there, all of these other types of applications can start to flow from it as people use our chocolate, they use the base ingredient. It starts becoming something that's not just like, what's that? Or, oh, that barbecue thing, to, oh, mesquite, that lovely, delicious, deep flavor profile that I think of other flavors that were not necessarily a part of people's childhoods in America in the 90s that are becoming much more popular, like matcha green tea flavored ice cream and red bean products and
black sesame,
black sesame.
Yeah.
All sorts of things that are starting to really permeate that, maybe even 15 years ago, you would have struggled in a city like Chicago to find maybe more than 1 or 2 places that were really doing a whole lot with it. And maybe those places wouldn't even have menus that were primarily in English, right? And now it's a part of something that a lot of different people like. And so that's the other thing that we also get really excited about, just being in this current food culture in this current country right now, of finally having all of these different flavors and all of these cooking techniques from all over the place start being able to compete at a really deep level with things like Cheetos and Doritos. And not that there's anything wrong with those. I love those things too. But, in addition to Pop-Tarts, we need things like delicious puff pastries and, croissants and things, from your Korean bakery that has all these amazing different flavor profiles in it. And so I feel like you're also dealing with a population that is so much more aware and comfortable with other types of foods and is actually looking in some ways to be more challenged by new types of entries into a space that's been existing, that's had a clear winner for so long. And so, I think long term, we do really see this having the ability to kind of come in and occupy a lot of like mind share, like some of these other ingredients that we maybe in many cases hadn't even known could be in different form factors for the longest time. Like I remember the first time I had green tea ice cream, and I maybe even had it like right around the same time the first time I ever had coffee flavored ice cream. And in both cases, like, man, I would have never thought as a child growing up that like ice cream could be more than just sweet with like a little bit of like some kind of flavoring in it, or maybe some mix-ins. Like there's this whole bitter category of flavors that's really interesting. There's this whole aromatic, earthy sort of like
nuttiness.
That you just you can get when you start looking beyond just what's been available in your local supermarket for most of your life.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing. I'm mind blown. Is there at what point do we take the reins, and because when you reach out to pastry chefs and other businesses, you're reliant, right? And so at what point do you provide a proof of concept and make your own brand of syrup, of mesquite syrup, of chocolate milk powder, right? Like mesquite powder.
Some of that stuff we've already started doing for sure. I think for us, we've also been chasing our product development with where we see the market opportunity. So we actually do have a syrup today that we've done some fun tests with a coffee shop that's actually an opening location in Pilsen, not too far away from here, called
Anticonquista. We're trying to get them on the pod.
They're awesome people. And we've done a little bit of exploration with them as they finished opening that store. It's something we're looking to continue to go deeper on. But I think it is creating these use cases where, for so much of the company's very short history, we really were thinking bars were the entry place, and we still think that they're very important for us. But just having this opportunity to be able to offer both an economic and an environmental advantage to people, especially small businesses in Chicago.
They care about all this stuff too.
And they care about all of this stuff too. And they also care about, not spending all of their money on one ingredient that is just, who knows how much it's going to cost tomorrow, right? So,
and like one thing that we've just enjoyed about like the whole Chicago community is that like people are really Chicago focused. Like people that are in the hospitality really want to use things that are within the Chicago. I mean, obviously our mesquite comes from South America, but we're building in the city too. And people really want to support us as much as we can support them, and trying to figure out different ways that we can help support them. I mean, obviously this is a very different ingredient, even though it has so many similarities, even from like a technical aspect of cocoa, but it's still like, okay, from a pastry chef, it's like, how do I temper this a little bit different? How can I use this in my croissant? Does it work well with chocolate?
So it's more than just taste. It's like, how does it like spread? How does it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There's like all of those very kind of like chemical elements to it too, which again, we're there exactly as you would need it to be. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really like at this moment where we're trying to, and I think starting to really finally find success with getting this into like those spaces and getting people to actually have a really deep interest in trying the product out, because they're also, it's not just an environmental story for them any longer. I think, not everybody has known that cocoa has had problems as much as we're starting to wake up to it. I think there's been a couple of like larger media pieces in the last 1.5 to 2 years that talk about the supply chain issues with it, talk about some of the issues with heavy metals that are starting to be found in much higher concentrations, and especially dark chocolates, where I think people are waking up to the larger reality of chocolate as not just a healthy indulgence, and not always even a healthy indulgence in most of the ways we eat it, right? If you're having 30 grams of sugar in a 53-gram bar of chocolate, you're not even mostly eating chocolate at that point. You're just mostly eating sugar, and it's tough to call that a health food anymore, right? But so there's this larger kind of knowledge that there's this environmental reason to look at what we're doing, but I think now there's also this economic reason, and ultimately that's going to be what changes the world around looking at this ingredient, is the fact that it can do what we want it to do and not necessarily cost more than what the other alternatives, or especially the alternative that has the largest presence in the market today too. And I think that was one of the things that would make a business like this very, very difficult to start. And it's made the small handful of people that have been trying to commercialize mesquite for a long time have trouble getting entry into the market because the economies of scale aren't really there compared to so many other crops that are just so much more mature in their industrialization. And so their prices are by default worse for mesquite. And very few people are just going to choose a more expensive product just for that reason alone, no matter what the other benefits associated with it are. And so we're in this like kind of one-time moment where all of a sudden chocolate is actually getting more expensive, which makes what we're doing seem more cost effective, not necessarily because our costs are going down, but just because the alternatives are starting to raise considerably. And that's really the kind of tailwind that we're looking to continue to access and take advantage of. And especially in the Chicago community. As Bob said, we love how just conscious of all of the things that are going on within the city, each of the city's maker communities are, whether that be in food or that be in, other forms of business or creative like engagements and things like that. And so, but I think if you are looking to start a food company, especially like a consumer packaged food company, you're definitely hard pressed to find a much better place in the U.S. to start it than Chicago. It's just a really great ecosystem here. Okay. A lot of the big companies are here. A lot of
manufacturing,
and also just a lot of ecosystem. I've heard other guests of yours talk about it too, just like the amount of free resources available to entrepreneurs.
Shared commercial kitchen space.
Exactly. And access to buyers and other things like that. And so I think that's also been something that we have started doing a lot more, especially in the last year, of just like, I'm actually relatively new to Chicago. I've only been here for about 2 years now.
What'd you think compared to New York?
Well, I'm from the Midwest originally. And so I think that one, like just being a lot closer to family has been really huge for me, especially as I've started my own. Compared to New York, it's a very different city. And I think of Chicago as offering like a lot of really, really distinct benefits over New York for me. I also really love New York. So I like love them like just two completely different entities.
And why? Is it because it never sleeps, or like there's always something to do, or?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I find really intoxicating about big cities, Chicago and New York alike, is that it tends to attract people who are looking at the world as a place that is kind of open to change and malleability, and that they can have an impact on it that's like a little bit larger than themselves. And that's something that I aspire to, and that I find really motivating in my own life. And so, a place like New York or a place like Chicago, you have people who are out changing the world, who are creating the fabric of the economy and the culture that we live in every single day. And to be around that, to be near it, to be with other people who are doing it, to do it yourself, I just find that incredibly, incredibly motivating and energizing and gratifying. And so I think the big difference that I noticed just kind of between the two cities is just sort of the cadence or the rhythm to them, when they wake up, when they go to bed, how they move around, and sort of how that kind of also expresses some of the different like long-term cultural like relevancies and mindsets there. But yeah, I've been really enjoying Chicago, and I've been really enjoying the community and being back in the Midwest generally. I think the only tough part is that I got a little soft on winter in New York. It doesn't quite get as peak cold there as it does here, where I think last year was a very mild winter where we only had like 2 weeks below -10. And I don't think I ever saw a day below zero in the 10 plus years I lived in New York. So
I got lucky.
I mean, we had bad weather. It got cold there, but it never like polar vortex cold. And so I had to kind of
I didn't know that. I wouldn't have expected that for some reason. It's more north. It's like, really?
I know. I
think they get a lot of mitigating factor from the ocean being right there. It's just and actually recently it got reclassified as a tropical environment because of its average temperature is so high during the summer. And I became much better at dealing with warm weather while I was there. So that's been a little bit of just like, well, somebody once told me there's no cold weather, there's only cold clothes. And I think there's truth to that, but there's also definitely cold weather. But I had to get a new coat, that's for sure.
Yeah. It was a tough sell to get him to move out here, but I think that we're both happier for it. So.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I loved hearing everything, guys, from the intimate dynamics between the family, between you two, as well as the business, and the impacts you guys are having in our local community as well as abroad. I'm excited to dive into the Mez and the mesquite, and to continue following along.
Yes.
Where can people follow? Wherever, all the platforms.
Yeah, so we're at mez.foods, pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also go to mezfoods.com,
okay.
Where you can find our website, our e-commerce site. We ship anywhere in the nation.
Okay.
And if listeners of this podcast will actually be getting a discount code for 15% off their order.
What, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and we'll let you announce that code.
Okay.
Separately.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Wow. Any physical retailers in the city?
Yeah. So we're at Vaca's Creamery in Lincoln, their Lincoln Square location. We're sold there. We're also sold at our manufacturing site, the plant way down on the south side of Chicago and back to the yards.
That's where they brew.
Yes, that's where Weiner Brewery is there. Yeah, they have a little retail store
I've only
there.
been there when Heifer Barbecue was there.
Oh,
yes.
man.
Yeah.
It was a really sad day when they moved out. Like we do our production days on Mondays and Thursdays, and Heifer and Weiner was a great end of shift
for Thursday.
Beer and barbecue.
That's a really cool space.
It's awesome.
Maybe I did see. I don't know. I was reading all the labels and all the companies over there. I'm like, to create a space with multiple businesses that can like coexist. It was really cool. Made me think. I'm like, because I want a larger space. I'm like, how do I get another larger space? Who wants to buddy up and get a larger space?
I mean,
I also think to rehabilitate such an old, sort of like unnatural space where crazy like things were. It was a manufacturing location, and now there's plans throughout it. It's very also designed, and they've also been lucky to have tenants who kind of like create really good sort of synergies with each other. Mm-hmm. There's a algae company on one part of it that actually uses a lot of the spent CO2 from the brewing process of Weiner, and so it's just like they actually I think are trying to do a talk at South by Southwest this year about creating like an integrated community of like having different businesses use each other's waste streams. Which is really, really cool.
Oh my gosh.
If you ever want to come down and watch us make chocolate, you're more than welcome.
Yeah.
Really?
So,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Fun.
Okay, I'll take you up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we grab a beer afterwards, but not some barbecue, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
they're not far. They're pop up at Novel recently in Pilsen, and then Dunier.
nice.
They're opening their own shop too, right? I think that's
what the end goal.
Yeah,
that's the end goal.
Yeah,
I love it. I love catching people in. Obviously you have met some success. It's just like I don't know if you would deem it the middle of your journey, but like, it's like you're not inaccessible yet to that degree, right? Like you still have the bandwidth to hop on an hour and a half long podcast and just share the story.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. I like to believe that we're at the very beginning still, kind of every single moment of our journey in a lot of ways. But and I also definitely would say that it never quite feels like you're successful, even if I've been in other businesses that were demonstrably very successful, and even in the middle of everything there, you're like, you feel like everything's just burning down all at the same time. And I think kind of knowing that also brings space for a bit of calm and a bit of reflection and a bit of enjoyment in the midst of all of the craziness, for sure. But I think for both Bob and I, like having that reset and always thinking that we're kind of like at the beginning of what we're doing is just a really nice like centering space for us, for sure.
Yeah. I liked what you said earlier about just reminding yourself about your mortality.
Yeah.
Is there anything physical or a token or that you do to remind yourself of that?
Yeah, actually, I have a little like poster on my wall.
Oh yeah,
the 4,000 weeks
Memento Mori one.
Yeah.
Oh really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's got 4,000 weeks on it, and every week I cross one off.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like it's very non-morbid. Actually, it's like, I could go into this much deeper, but I think there's a lot of really interesting elements of how our culture is built around sort of trying to dance around the fact that we die at the end of all of this, no matter what. And I think that when you can kind of sit with your own mortality and with death, and just see it as just one other part of this amazing whatever life actually is.
You've been given a torch.
Yeah.
And let's try to carry that torch to someone else.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But by the very nature of life happening, death also has to happen. And if you accept that deep, deep truth, I think it's one of the things that allows you to make and nobody has every moment this way, but it lets you at any moment come back to a space where you realize the preciousness of what's happening right now. And that's always useful in my experience.
Are there any other retailers you would like to be in, or do you feel like your efforts are better focused somewhere else?
I think we always want to go into different retailers. We've been chatting with a few folks, but we're really like very heads down on trying to sell these chips that we're taking all of these in a couple different formulations and turning them into like chocolate chips so that bakers,
cocoa powders and things like that. But yeah, I basically anywhere in Chicago that has like 5 or so doors or less is something that we're super interested in.
I feel like a lot of our recent makers are in Agora, or L&M,
yes,
Andale. I think you guys are on Here Market.
Yep,
yeah,
we're on Here.
We're on Here. Yeah, I think Agora, Andale, all of those places are definitely places we've reached out to
I feel like
before,
it'd be a
places
good
that
fit.
we continue
But there's only so much shelf space.
There's only so much shelf space.
It is a bit of a zero-sum game, and there's a lot of really cool businesses going on in Chicago right now, and all of them already have very stocked chocolate shelves. And it's just like for us also continuing to be better about explaining like what difference in that space that we occupy.
Very
as well.
humbling.
Yeah.
Very much so. But also I think part of it is just us getting a little bit more comfortable to go out and make friends. Both of us kind of come from a background of not wanting to impose on people and not wanting to make people uncomfortable.
Taking up space and
taking up time. Nobody wants to talk to you.
Very much you realize.
How do you do networking events?
Very much you realize, you have to kind of get to a space where you yourself are uncomfortable in order for things to kind of move forward on that. And so that's definitely something that we're spending more time on. And I think the other thing too is just having spent more time building community in Chicago. What's so great about it is, you rarely talk to another company, even if you're occupying very, very similar spaces on the shelf, that looks at you as a competitor. There's always somebody there to try to make an intro for you or lift you up. And I think that's been something that, especially a relatively recent transplant to the city, kind of spend more and more time diving into and really getting to know the people here. You really just see that there's so many people that want you to succeed and want to help you along that pathway. And I think that's one of the other big reasons why, we say that you're hard pressed to find a better space to start especially a food company in the States, is because you have all of these people that really have like a give back or pay it forward kind of mentality, because somebody kind of gave them a helping hand along their way too. And so that's been really incredible. And that's probably also how we will spend most of our time getting to know those bakers and ice cream makers and retailers that we want to be talking to.
I love it.
And if people ever want like chips to try out stuff, we're always giving out samples for people to try.
Yeah. Okay.
So
literally reach out to us. Instagram, reach out to us on the contact form on our website, hello@mezfoods.com. Any of those places you will
ship it out, drop it off.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
We want people to try it out. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, guys, it was truly a pleasure and honor.
Likewise.
Everyone tune in. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Victor.
Bye.
Thank you, Victor.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, you might even like this video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe right here. I'll see you in the next one.